So I am recording this program, and I'm really just going to say Happy Memorial Day and introduce you all to, and some of you know Erik and some of Erik's family, but on Memorial Day today, Development Director of the National Nordic Museum, brand spanking new down in Ballard, Erik Pihl reflects on those who personify the Nordic values of openness, social justice, innovation, and respect for nature through life and service. Pihl also will speak about the new National Nordic Museum and its tale of Nordic immigration to the US, along with 12,000 years of human history in the Nordic region. So without any further ado, I'm going to shut my mic off and thank Erik Pihl for providing this wonderful educational program for us today.
Thank you, Alan, and thank you, Alan. It's great to be here. Nice to be able to spend Memorial Day afternoon with all of you. Let me just share my screen here. Yes, here we go. And yes, excellent. Well, I thought I'd start with this picture, and I'm just going to move my screen around slightly. So here we go. This is a picture of the Eriksson family from Lemland on the Åland Islands, which is an archipelago of islands between Finland and Sweden. And it's an autonomous group of islands. It's an autonomous region within the Nordics, and it is attached to Finland. But at the time the family moved to the US around the turn of the century, it was a Russian Grand Duchy. It gained its independence along with Finland in December of 1917. It had been under Russian control from 1908 to 1917, and prior to that it had been part of Sweden for more than 500 years. Anyway, why I'm thinking of this family today happens to be that 3 of them were Hearthstone residents. And Therese in the upper left corner, Eriksson was a nurse at Furland Sanatorium. She went to PLU. She came to the US when she was about 15 years old, went to nursing school at PLU, and went to spend her career working at Furland Sanatorium. And she lived in Fremont, and when the Hearthstone opened, she moved into the Hearthstone. And so I used to come and visit her there. As I did Asif, her brother, which is seated just below her. He was a sea captain. He went to sea at the young age of 13, and ultimately became a sea captain. He originally sailed on the tall sailing ships out of the Åland Islands, as did his father. And then he moved to the States in the just after the turn of the century. And then seated next to Asif is Conrad Hagblom, and Conrad Hagblom. He is married to Jenny, who's seated just behind him to your right. And she was the oldest of the Eriksson family. And Conrad was a contractor and built quite a few homes in Wallingford and Green Lake area. So, and the whole family pretty much lived right in the immediate area of the Hearthstone. And when it opened, they all moved in and lived there and had and enjoyed very much living at the Hearthstone. So while I'm giving you this talk today, I was thinking of them, and as my kind of Memorial Day thought. So just to talk a little bit about the Nordic region, I think, some of you have a background in the Nordics, but for those who may not, I think this is it's always good to kind of focus ourselves or orient ourselves a little bit. The Nordic countries are in the northern part of Europe, and there's 5 nations that make up the Nordics: Denmark, Finland, Norway, Iceland, and Sweden. And then there are 3 autonomous regions. We talked about one, the Åland Islands, which I'll just use my pointer to show you. It's this group of islands. That's not one autonomous region. The Faroe Islands over here out to the west between Norway and Iceland. and then of course Greenland further up north beyond Iceland. So those all comprise of the Nordic region. A few facts about the Nordic region. If it was a nation, the landmass of the Nordics would be about 1.3 million square miles, which would be the 7th largest nation in the world. The population of all of the Nordics is 27 million, so it'd be about 49th in population. So the next one, not surprisingly, would be the density is about 19.7 people per square mile, or 225th in the world. So very low density across the whole region, obviously different in the cities, but low density. And then interestingly, the gross domestic product GDP of the region is 1.17 trillion, so it would be rank about 17th in the world. We talked about the nation states and the 3 autonomous regions, but there's also a cultural region, Sapmi, which is where the Sami people live in the northern part of Norway, Norway, Sweden, and Finland. Just kind of, I think, always graphically. So the population of the Nordic region is about 2/3 of the size of California. And then its land mass is roughly about 1/3 of the size of the United States. So remembering on Memorial Day today, I thought we'd start with thinking of some significant figures through history, Nordic figures, either people in the Nordic countries or in the US. And just thought I'd pull out a few of those to start with, and then we'll talk a little bit more about the museum. The first one is Thea Foss, and Thea Foss is lived from 1857 to 1927, and about 1898, she and her husband moved to Tacoma from the Midwest, and they were from Norway. And her husband, after the family got settled, said, "I'm going to go find work," and he was going to be gone for 2 months and went somewhere up north. And while he was away, Thea thought, well, I think I could start a little business. And so she bought a rowboat and fixed it up and sold it for $15. And she thought that was kind of clever. And so she bought another boat and a few more boats. And by the time her husband came back in 2 months, she had started a business of both owning boats that she could lease out to people to use, or of rowing people around to get around. And so she turned out to be making more money than her husband was, so he went to work for her. And just after the turn of the 20th century, she started acquiring powered boats and eventually tugboats. And today, Foss Maritime is one of the largest maritime companies in the world, providing services and sending tugs and everywhere around the world, and providing complex services. So a very innovative and interesting woman who decided to find a niche where something was needed and to start a business, and a business that has had an impact for more than 100 years. Big Jakob Bjarnason, who lived from 1864 to 1927, was from Iceland. And Big Jake was first a Ballard police officer, and then when Ballard became folded into the city of Seattle, was annexed by the city of Seattle, he became a member of the Seattle Police Department. Now, Big Jake was called Big because Big Jake was 7 feet 4 inches tall. And he did not carry a weapon, a sidearm, a pistol. He just had a baton. And you see on the large picture of Jake, there is a baton at his belt. That was all he needed. He was very much loved by the whole community and highly respected. And at the same time, he was highly feared by the lawless, as they say. When Big Jake passed away in 1927, there were 2,000 people that attended his funeral at Evergreen Washelli, which is quite an amazing thing. And some of you may have seen a news story a couple of years ago. There was never a formal headstone laid for Big Jake, and so the Seattle Police Department learned of this, and they placed a headstone in his name about 4 or 5 years ago. And it is says of Big Jake that he was the first person to really engage in community policing, because he was out there talking to people, engaging the community, and quite an admirable person, and very service-minded in terms of helping his community. And you see on the picture on the right, you can see Big Jake standing with the other members of the Ballard force, and obviously standing quite taller than everyone else. So I'm sure that he was someone that, with his stature and his presence, happened to command some control. Now, the next one is Olaf the Fifth, who lived from 1903 to 1996, and he was King of Norway in 1957 to 1991. Now, some of you may have watched the film that is currently on KCTS, or the series that has been on KCTS called Atlantic Crossing. And if you haven't watched it, I would encourage you to watch it. You can access it through KCTS 9. And it is the story of Crown Princess Marta and Crown Prince Olaf, who was then before he was king, and it took place during the wartime when Norway was invaded by Germany, and the royal family had to leave Norway for the war. And Crown Prince Olaf, together with his father King Håkon, went and spent the war in England, and the Crown Prince Olaf helped to develop and manage Norway's resistance movement from England, and was very influential. Meanwhile, Crown Princess Marta and their 3 children spent the war in the United States, in Washington, D.C., and as some of you who've seen the show will know, she became good friends with the President of the United States and President Roosevelt, and that ultimately helped to build awareness in America about what was happening in Europe and the need for American support. On the right-hand side of your screen, you see a picture of King Olaf, who was here in Seattle in 1975 to dedicate Bergen Place, which is the square in Ballard. And on the far left, with the chain around his neck, is the mayor of Bergen, and then King Olaf is on the far right. And Bergen Place and this plaque are still there today, but here was someone who was a royal, but took it very personally that he should be involved and help the war effort in Norway. And later, when he was king, he was known to take his skis, put them over his shoulder, and walk out on the street and get on the train and take it out to the countryside and go skiing. And somebody said to him, "Well, how can you do that without bodyguards?" And he said, "Oh, I have 4 million bodyguards," referring to the population of Norway at the time. He was viewed by many to be the people's king, and was much loved. Next, Lori Thorne, or also known in the United States as Major Larry Allen Thorne. He lived from 1919 to 1965. In the first part of his career, and on the far right, you can see a picture of him when he was a captain in the Finnish army. He fought in the Winter War and the Continuation War. The Winter War was the war when the Soviet Union attacked Finland, who had gained its independence in 1917. And this was in 1930s. And it lasted 6 months between, even fewer than 6 months, November to March. And Finland, this small country, was able, of a few million people, was able to repel far superior forces, 3 times their number, and prevail in the conflict. And it's because of dedicated people like Captain Thorne, who fought very valiantly and very aggressively for Finland. It's often, if you know any Finnish people and you've heard the term sisu, this is where the word I think was probably developed, was because this sense of tenacity and fortitude that is a characteristic of Finns, that where they could prevail in a battle with far superior forces from a far larger country, and still maintain their independence. Captain Thorne, following the war, longer story, but which I won't go into all the details of it, ends up moving to the United States, and he was granted U.S. citizenship by an act of Congress, and then went on to join the United States Army as a ranger, as a special forces officer, and rose to the rank of captain. And he was fighting in Vietnam, and was noted for his training ability and teaching forces and guiding forces. He did 2 tours of duty in Vietnam, and on his 2nd tour of duty, he and his other command team were flying in a helicopter, providing support for a group of special forces members that had to land and provide intel back to headquarters. And it was important that Captain Thorne and his colleagues provide air support for those who are on the ground. However, there was a heavy fog, and when the ground forces became airborne again, they could not find Captain Thorne's helicopter, nor another helicopter was part of it. And in the end, it was found that his helicopter had crashed, and he was honored by the United States government by being promoted to major posthumously, and given the Air Cross, and in recognition of his service and valiant duty to the country. So here's someone who had a military career, both in a valiant military career, both in Finland and in the United States. Then Dag Hammarskjöld. Dag Hammarskjöld, a Swede, and a statesman, a diplomat, lived from 1905 to 1961. He was the 2nd Secretary General of the United Nations from 1953 until 1961. In 1961, he had traveled to the Congo with a group of other UN peacekeepers to try and negotiate a peaceful settlement to some trouble that was brewing in the region. And his plane crashed, and there was some debate at the time of whether it was a accidental crash, but that later was discovered that it was most likely shot down, and the CIA attributed that to Russian forces shooting down the aircraft. But Dag Hammarskjöld was very highly respected as an incredible statesman, and someone who had great vision for peace and worked very hard for peace. In fact, President Kennedy called him the greatest statesman of the 20th century. And so I included Dag Hammarskjöld in our thoughts of interesting people today. Certainly someone who believed in world peace and working very hard for that. Then Bengt Flemming Farshuh Vid. He had the nickname of Flammen because his hair was red, and he lived from 1921 to 1944, so not very long, 23 years. And on the right is a memorial that was raised in his honor. And it says in Danish at the bottom, "De beste må dø," the best die young. And Bengt worked with as part of the Holger Danske resistance group in World War II, fighting for the resistance movement inside of Denmark. And he was awarded the U.S. Medal of Freedom in 1951. If you would like to know more about Flemming, there's a fantastic film called Flame and Citron, and it was created a few years ago and made in Denmark about Bengt and the activities he engaged himself in during the German occupation of Denmark, as he worked to gain freedom for Denmark. And then Folke Bergmandotte, Count of Wiesborg, a Swedish diplomat, lived from 1895 to 1948. Folke Bergmandotte was famous during World War II for saving more than 30,000 people from concentration camps in Germany. On the picture on the right shows the white buses, these famed white buses. They were all painted white with red crosses on them to make it clear that they were Red Cross buses. It was highly perilous work to take these buses into Germany in the latter days of the war, to free people from concentration camps and to bring them back through armed forces from both sides, and also during a time when the Allies were bombing Germany. So it was a very challenging and harrowing time, but as I said, he did save more than 30,000 people from the concentration camps, negotiated their release. Interestingly, he also received was approached by Heinrich Himmler Himmler did this without letting Hitler know that he was doing it, but he reached out to Count Bernadotte to try to negotiate a peace for Germany with the Allies. And it was that offer of peace was rejected because Germany only wanted to settle with the West. They did not want to settle with Russia, and it was not something that could not be agreed to. So Folke Bergmandotte left after the war, became very active in working for world peace. He was assigned to work in Palestine and solving an Israeli and negotiating a peaceful settlement to the Israeli and Arab conflict. And while he was negotiating the peace, a militant group in Israel, the Lehi group, assassinated him, and so he died in service to the people of the world, trying to bring peace to the world, and actively lived and worked for that. Well, those are some examples, and I think I have one more woven in later in the presentation, but we'll skip past this and I'm sorry, I have double slides there. There we go. So now the National Nordic Museum. So why a Nordic Museum in Seattle? What's the connection between Seattle and the Nordic region, and what's the impact of Nordics here historically and today, and what's the relevance for a museum here today and here in the United States? So why Seattle? I'll answer that with this next slide. Is at the time there were more in Seattle at the turn of the century and for the first decade, about 1/3 of all immigrants coming into the region were from the Nordic countries, from Denmark, Finland, Iceland, Norway, and Sweden, and that ultimately had a big impact. Today, there's more than 800,000 people in our region who self-identify as having Nordic ancestry. That's about 12% population of our state. About half of those are from have Norwegian ancestry, and so there's a very keen history as part of it. As we think of the history of our region, might go back to those questions just to make it easy. What's the impact of Nordics here? I think if we all look around us, we can see things such as Swedish Hospital, and we talked about Foss Maritime, and if you go down to Ballard, the working waterfront in Ballard still has lots of Norwegian fishermen that are working in the working waterfront, and shipbuilders. The Pacific Fishermen Shipyard is owned by 200 Norwegian families, and it still is today, and so still very much an active connection. And today, Nordic companies are still coming here to do business in this region. A lot of people are coming from in the technology sector from the Nordics, and starting up new companies here because of the opportunity to work in partnership with and close to Amazon and Microsoft. So what's the relevance today? I mean, the Nordic Museum today is, and as we'll kind of talk about as we look at the museum, is very much talking about the Nordic region today and the ways in which we here in the United States are connected to the Nordics and the Nordics to us. So not just looking at historically how things were 100 years ago, or 200 years ago when people started coming here, but what are things like today, and how do we work in a collaborative way? So the we'll look a little bit at the transformation of the museum and how we got to the new museum that we have today, which is located on Market Street, and I'll show you a map of that. But before we get to that, some of you may have visited the Old Nordic Heritage Museum, which was located up on Sunset Hill in Ballard in the old Daniel Webster School, which was a 100-plus-year-old school building. The museum was housed there from 1980 to 2017. And it was a building that served the community well. At the time, in 1980, when the building was identified as a possible site, it had been abandoned for some years, and a group of hardworking and dedicated volunteers helped to rehabilitate the building and make it possible to use. So served the community well for almost 4 decades, but it was a site that the museum did not own, and there was a long vision by the museum's board to own our own building, to own our own site, which was viewed as important for long-term sustainability. So there was a lot of effort made to identify a site, and a lot that were considered, and we finally ended up with this location in Ballard, right along the working waterfront. Market Street is just on the north of us, and right along, and this is Market Street, and you may recall the business district, Bergen Place, that I mentioned earlier, is located right over here in this green spot. And then these are the Norwegian-owned fishing maritime industries, as well as across the bay is the Salmon Bay and the Fisherman's Terminal. So a wonderful and ideal location. We began acquiring the land in 2003, and it took about 8 years to acquire all 3 pieces of the land. It stretches all the way from Northwest 28th over here to Northwest 26th, which is just off our screen to the left. And so it took a while for us to persuade the owner of this block to sell us the increments. And in 2008, we began searching for architects and raising money, and the new building was opened in 2018. And this is the opening itself on May 5th. We had all 5 Nordic ambassadors were here from Washington, D.C. Dagfinn Høybråten, who's was at the time Secretary General of the Nordic Council of Ministers, was here, as well as Crown Princess Mary from Denmark and the President of Iceland. So we had a fantastic beginning to our journey. And the new museum is just a spectacular space. It's was designed by Methuen Architects here in Seattle, working in partnership with Juhani Palasma from Helsinki, who is an architect and a professor of architecture. And he added greatly to the project to really help us think about how to embody Nordic identity in architecture. And so as you walk through the main entrance of the museum on 28th, you look down this long hall. It's called the Fjord Hall because like a fjord, the walls are narrow at one end, wide at another. And then there's a slight lean to the walls, and it was a metaphor for water as a metaphor that connects all aspects of the Nordic countries. And so this also connects all aspects of the museum. And you'll notice on the second floor, there are a series of bridges that go across, connecting these two sides of the museum that tell the Nordic story and the Nordic American story, which we'll talk about in just a moment. If you turn around to the west, this is the entry that you come through, and this wonderful sheer curtain wall of transparent glass that embodies the transparency of the Nordic region. And then if you were to turn to the south, you would encounter our Osberg Great Hall, which is a 4,000 square foot hall that can host dinners like you see here, or lectures for 400 people, or concerts. There are very well-tuned acoustics that can make possible any type of musical performance. So it's a really fantastic space where the community can gather for all sorts of occasions. And as you move down the Fjord Hall into the museum building, you'll notice a large map of the Nordic region that happens to be about 30 feet high. We wanted to create this large map to help orient people that are visiting the museum, some of whom may be coming to the museum for the first time and may not know about the Nordic region, and others who may have family members who came from the Nordics. And so it's a great way for people that do have family ties to look at where their family came from and to share that with children and grandchildren. And as you continue down the hall, you notice above you, there are some wonderful glass birds. These were made by a glass artist in the Faroe Islands who made 40 of them for us and came from the Faroes to install them himself, Tronder Patterson. And they are quite stunning. They're all different. It's the first permanent installation of his work in the United States, and they are all reflexive of birds that he can see from his studio on the Faroe Islands. And we thought they were a great metaphor for the idea of migration, which is a core theme of the museum. And again, you see these bridges connecting back and forth, the Nordic side on the north and the Nordic American side on the south. So one of the really interesting things about the museum is that it is created around some core themes of values, which I think is really an interesting thing for a museum. I don't know, I've worked in the museum field for about 25 years, and I don't know of another museum that has organized itself around values. And so but as we began to work on the idea of how do we link together the museum, we wanted to tell the story of Nordic immigration to the United States, which is roughly about 150 to 170 years of time from the middle of the 19th century to today. And we realize that that's such a short period of time in the context of 12,000 years of Nordic history. And so we wanted to tell both sides of those stories so that people would understand the Nordic immigration in context. And what we found was linked both the Nordic side and the Nordic American side together was a series of values. We came up with this because we engaged a group of about 200 scholars in the Nordic region and here in the US to really help us think about this, the content for the new museum. And I think they came up with quite a successful concept. So the first is openness, trust, tolerance, freedom of expression, social justice, egalitarianism, working for the common good, respect for others, innovation, creativity, competence, entrepreneurialism, all very active things in the Nordic region today. The Nordics are quite recognized quite regularly as in the top 5 to 10 countries in Europe in terms of innovation. Respect for nature, outdoor life, sustainability, and green design. So those are themes that weave their way through the exhibition. And as you come into the ground floor of the core exhibition, you enter this first gallery that has 5 different cases for each of the Nordic countries, from Denmark, Finland, Iceland, Norway, Sweden. And then on the far end, Sapmi, the region where the Sami people live in the north. And we've selected iconic elements from each one of these countries that talk about the identity and culture of each one of them. And you see kind of a close-up of the Norway case. It's not surprising that there would be skis and skiing would be a theme, but also there's a Hardanger violin, there's a Norwegian sweater, and all key things that are emblematic of Norwegian culture. And we've done that for each one of the 5 countries and Sapmi. And then we created a film for people that may not know the region and those who may know it a little bit. We thought it was important to gather a series of voices of people that are living both here in the Pacific Northwest and people that are leaders in the Nordic countries to talk about what does it mean to be Nordic. And here you see Dagfinn Høybråten, who came to the grand opening, Secretary General of the Nordic Council of Ministers, talking about that at the core of Nordic values is the respect for every human being. Lots of great insights there. And then you move up to the second floor, and the first thing you're greeted by is this space, which we call Sense of Place. And it is an environment, really. You walk in among trees and you can sit down and watch a short film that shows you what it looks like in the Nordic countries. And it's a no question a beautiful and lovely place, but also a very challenging environment in which to live, and people have lived and thrived in that environment for 12,000 years. So we think it's a great context to start out one's visit to the museum to understand that setting of what it's like in the Nordics. And then as you move beyond there, you're greeted by this gallery, and along the far wall on your right-hand side is a timeline that covers those 12,000 years of history. And then in the center, some key themes. And the first one is innovation, and then the great migration of the move that many people took from the Nordic countries to the United States. And then the modern 20th century era, and we'll look at those all in detail. And we, one of the things about, it's a great idea to cover 12,000 years of history, because that is how long people have been living up in the north, and not that many people know about that. But the museum here in Seattle did not have objects from all of that time period. And so we were able to create relationships with 8 of the national museums in the Nordic countries, and they very generously lent us objects from their collection. And you see in front of you some wonderful Stone Age Neolithic items. There are axe heads and that are more than 5,000 years old, a clay jar. There's even a Norwegian fishing hook from around the year 500. And so these wonderful objects that were graciously loaned to us help tell that story about people that lived up in the north for now across 12 millennium. And here's a little more close-up of that. And there's a bronze axe in the middle, number 6, beneath the pot, that was found in Sweden. And then the Vikings, very important to talk about the Viking Age because it was such a pivotal moment. But what's really important here is we talk about innovation in the Viking Age, and this boat design of a Viking vessel. This is a scale model of the Osberg ship that was found buried in Norway about 120 years ago. And it was created by a craftsman living in Anacortes, who has made a number of Viking vessels, including one floating one that he's sailed out in Puget Sound. And he went down out into the woods and cut down a birch, a birch tree, yes, and made the planks and made this boat using the same methods and techniques that the Vikings used to create their boats. When you come to the museum and you see it in person, you'll understand why we wanted to have this model, because it really demonstrates how innovative the design was. It was shallow draft so that it could sail through all of Europe's rivers, but broad of beam so that it could sail across the open North Sea. Leif Erikson sailed to America in the year 1000. And they did that in boats just like this. And they were able to do it because the boats were seaworthy and could handle the North Sea. And then not only do we wanted to have a model of the Viking ship, but we wanted to have authentic objects that the Vikings held and lived with and carried. And so on the left-hand side, there's a case of objects that, including the entire contents of a Viking grave from Norway in the lower part, and a fantastic Viking sword from the National Museum of Denmark. And then in the middle case, some precious objects. There's a Viking silver hoard on the raised pedestal. Some wonderful cloak clasps, the roundish gold objects. And then even some keys that were found on the island of Gotland. All of these ranging in time from around the year 800, perhaps a little bit before, but around 800 to the year 1000 plus. And then over on the right-hand side are some objects made from organic materials. So you can see, maybe not so clearly, but there's some combs on the lower left, which is people often are surprised by those because they think of the Vikings as these fierce warriors. But in fact, they also were very concerned about hygiene, but they were not only fierce warriors, but they were fantastic traders and adventurers. And the Vikings did not have a written record. All that we know about them is the material culture, the things that they left behind. And the things that have been written about Vikings were written by the people that they conquered. So probably it's thought that there could be a bit of the opinion of those who were conquered coming out in those tales as well. So as we look further down, you'll see on your right, there's a section that covers the Middle Ages. And then we get to this plinth that really talks about leaving the Nordic countries. What was it like to leave the Nordic region and to leave a place for a place you'd never been before? And we did not have, obviously, computers in the turn of the century, nor did we have telephones or television or any of this. There were photographs, of course, but people, for the most part, were going someplace that they did not know what it looked like and what it would be like when I got there. And many people left with either $10 or $20 in their pocket. So they did not have left knowing they did not have the means to return, going to a place that was a mystery. And then this is where the bridges come in, play a major role. And this is this transition from the Nordic side over to North America. You can see in this case, the bridge over to North America, and we'll step across that now. And you see here, this side is organized a little differently. On the Nordic America side, it's what did people bring with them? And in this case, folk costumes and trunks and artwork. And what careers did people have? They worked obviously in logging and fishing and mining and farming. And what innovations did Nordic Americans make? And you see probably most prominently here is this giant fish processing machine in red, which prior to its invention, all salmon that was canned in the region had to be cleaned by hand. This machine was able to process 1,000 fish an hour, so dramatically more efficient and more economical, as a matter of fact. And then over on the left, you see a large crab pot. That is a king crab pot, and it was Norwegian fishermen who in the 1960s really innovated king crab fishing in Alaska and opened up that fishery that is still in play today. And then on the flip side of those exhibitions is a series of things about the local region, about business in the region. Obviously, not surprisingly, Nordstrom's department stores featured there, and Nordstrom, which began its life as Nordstrom Wallin. You can see also there's a Foss tug fishing boat. We talked about Thea Foss a little bit earlier, and some more farming information down the way. And then on the other wall we talk about where did people come to in the United States. So we are a national museum, so we think in national context, not just regional any longer. And then, so on the far left, it's about coming to the East Coast, which people started from the Nordic region coming to the East Coast as early as the mid 17th century, 1600s, when they came to the New Delaware colony. Near Philadelphia and the Delaware River Valley. The Midwest is next, and then the Pacific Northwest. And I'll say something that makes the Pacific Northwest really unique among the rest of the United States is that Nordic immigration didn't happen just in the 19th and early 20th century. It's happened throughout the 20th century, because in the middle of the century, there were engineers from aerospace engineers that came to work at the Boeing company. They were recruited by Boeing because they were the best in the world. And later, people came to work in telecommunications, and then and now in the tech sector. And so there's still Nordic immigration of people coming from the Nordic region to live here in the Pacific Northwest. And then going back to the Nordic side, something we didn't have in the old museum and we wanted to add here is to talk about the 20th century, because the 20th century, amongst those 12,000 years, was a time of very pivotal change, a time of really where Nordic societies were grown and evolved to become very advanced societies. So some of those ideas were around social change, of how can we build better societies where everybody can have a place to live, everybody can have beautiful things that they live with, everybody can have access to healthcare, everybody can have food to eat and a place to live, and everybody can have healthcare. And so at the core of that idea was this idea around living with beautiful things in your daily life. And so some of this furniture that you see in front of you looks very contemporary, like it was made yesterday, but some of these designs go back to the middle of the century and before, and we wanted to call that out here because it's so well linked to that idea of modernism and new thinking. So also in the 20th century was obviously the war, and so we talk a little bit about that. And it's in Finland, we talked about the Winter War and the Continuation War. Certainly quite amazing accomplishments on the Finnish front to be able to repel superior forces that were better armed and better resourced, but Finnish sisu paid out in the end. And then, the Norwegians, the German surrender in Norway in 1945, and I wanted to call this out as another Memorial Day person is Terje Roland, who was lived from 1915 to 1993, and he's on your left. And the Norwegian commandant, the German commandant of Norway, in the center of the picture, wanted to surrender, but he insisted on surrendering to a high-ranking army officer. And all of the members of the Norwegian army were working out of England. And so the highest ranking person they had was Terje Roland, who was a resistance fighter. And they were able to get him to send him over to the palace in the fortress in Oslo that day to accept the surrender from this German officer. And funny story, Terje Roland actually declined to take a photographer along. He thought, it's not that big of a deal. We're just going to accept the surrender. But anyway, a photographer was found by someone else and brought along, and this photo was quickly made its way all across Norway and has been an iconic image of that day and memory of that. So in honor of Terje Roland and his work in the Norwegian resistance then. And then lastly, we come to this gallery, which is very much about connecting with the Nordic region today. It is talks about Nordic values and invites, in normal times, non-COVID times, invites audiences to use these touch screens or to use the wall that you see in the far end to engage in a conversation about Nordic values and your own interpretation of it. That will come back again as we make our way through COVID, but our touch screens are turned off for the moment. But in this room, we also do talk about what's happening in the Nordic countries today and how are the Nordics involved in different places around the world. You see the world map there, and then you see there's iconic examples from the Nordic region today, including Nordic mystery riders. There's a Swedish self-inflating bike helmet. There's Angry Birds and Minecraft pieces exhibited, which talk about the rise of the technology movement, and then also the Nordic Culinary Manifesto is also featured in these galleries as well. And if you, when it's operating, you'll see some feedback about the region and what role that Nordic Americans played in the region in terms of influencing political approach and laws that think about the care and concern for all people. And then something else we do every year, we host a Nordic Innovation Summit. Began doing this in 2018, and what we noticed was that, as we thought about it, is that the Nordic countries were sending representatives to have offices in the Silicon Valley in California because they thought that was where innovation was happening in America, but they weren't thinking about the Pacific Northwest. And similarly, we had companies here in the Pacific Northwest, such as Microsoft, who were buying Nordic companies like Nokia and like Skype and Bluetooth and others, and yet companies here were not thinking of the Nordics as the center for innovation that they are. So we wanted to create a dialogue, and so we started doing that 3 years ago in 2018, and then this last year, due to COVID, we had to pivot and offer the Nordic Innovation Summit virtually, and we ended up having more than 6,000 people attend the Nordic Innovation Summit. That still lives on our YouTube page, so if you're interested, you can access those videos and play them for free and learn more about what's happening in the Nordic countries and here today on the innovation front. And then we have a special exhibition space where we house terrific current exhibitions right now. There's an exhibition about ski jumping or ski hopping in Norwegian. It's the Pacific Northwest was a center for ski jumping in America from around the turn of the century through 1975. And there were many Norwegians who came to compete here. This happens to be all members of one family jumping at the same time. And so that's currently on view and through July 18th. So I invite you to come down and take a look. And then most significantly is an exhibition we have on view, Among Forests and Lakes, landscape masterpieces from the Finnish National Gallery. It's about 50 paintings covering 150 years of time in all of the regions of Finland, from the archipelagos in the south all the way up to the fjords of the north and the Arctic region. And it's absolutely stunning pictures by some of Finland's greatest artists. The two national museums that were super generous to us in lending some of their most important works by some of Finland's greatest artists. And interestingly, half of the artists reflected in the exhibition are women and half are men. It comes from two galleries, the Athenaeum and the Kiasma. both in Helsinki, and invite you to come down. And we also have some more talks coming up. There's a talk about some of the artists, Galan Kalala, who painted this lovely picture that's you see in front of you now. And we have one of the world experts on Galan Kalala happens to be here in the United States, and he's giving a talk later in June, sorry. So who is our audience? A little bit more about the museum. So we have about 150,000 visitors a year. Our visitors are evenly distributed age-wise in the 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, 65 plus. That is a change since we moved to our new location. We're gender balanced, skewing slightly towards women. And nearly 15% of our audiences are Black, Indigenous, and people of color. And this was really interesting to me when we did the study in 2019. More than half of our visitors do not have Nordic ancestry, but they're interested in what's happening in the Nordic region. They're interested in, they've heard about the new museum and they've wanted to come and visit. And so we are drawing a much more diverse audience than ever before. And we, in the last year, began offering regional, national, began offering virtual programs. And so now we have a regional, national, and global audience that is attending our programs. As I mentioned, the Innovation Summit, we had 6,000 viewers. Those 6,000 viewers came from 19 countries, so, and almost all of the 50 states in the US. So we are regularly attracting broad audiences through our virtual programs, and I invite you to visit those as well. We have those on YouTube, or you can sign up for some of them on the museum's website, which is here, nordicmuseum.org, and you can find out about additional information about visiting the museum. And so with that, I will invite any questions, and I will stop the presentation and turn on my screen so I can see you all. So does anyone have any questions? And you can raise your hand electronically or the old-fashioned way too. So.
I guess I could start. I remember you saying before we started this presentation that your current exhibitions are there until a certain date, and I'm very, very interested if and when we can start getting people out again in visiting the museum. So when does your current exhibit run through?
Sure, great question. The Finnish exhibition is on view through October, and then the ski jumping exhibition is on view through the middle part of July. And while we're talking about it, you might, it's a good thing for me to tell a little bit about. We have been open since February, and we were also open last fall for a while. And we have had an opportunity to give a great deal of thought about safety practices. So we have adopted very conscientious approaches to ensuring everyone's safety at the museum through social distancing, wearing masks, time ticketing, and a variety of means. So we've done surveys of our visitors, and we've received have received a 97 out of 100 score for creating a safe place for visitors to come. So you're all very welcome to come anytime, and happy to arrange that. We do limit the amount of attendance to about 50% of our occupancy.
Thank you.
Yeah.
You're probably reading the same chat I am. I'll let you read it.
Well, I actually was, I see Marion raised her hand, but yes, in your early slides, there's a photo of a little boy in Atlantic crossing as an adult. Yes, that is correct. Yes, interestingly, in 1930, when Crown Princess Marta had to leave Norway, her son was as an infant, and this is an interesting story that was not told in the film, but I happen to know this from somebody who heard it firsthand from a member of the royal family who was present that day, one of his sisters. When the current king of Norway was an infant, and when they got to the border, they did not have passports. Crown Princess Marta was a Swedish princess, but she did not have her passport with her, and so the sentries at the border weren't going to let them in, and she held up her son and said, do you know who this is? And this is the future king of Norway. And so they let them in and to Norway. So yes, the king that I talked about earlier, King Olaf, was the crown prince in the film that you saw, Atlantic Crossing, and then her son is now the young boy in the film, in the series, is now the current king of Norway. And Marion, you had a question.
Yes. What about class? Do you sponsor classes?
Yeah, excellent. Great question. We have a number of classes we do offer, and we have craft classes. We have lectures and talks about different themes. So there's a lot that's going on, and many of those are virtual. And certainly as we move into normal times again, we will be offering classes in person. We did have on-site language classes for some time, but we had to discontinue those during COVID, but we are looking at seriously re-engaging on-site language classes as well. But there's a number of we offer about 100 programs and classes a year, so quite a few. Any other questions? Oh, Marion, another question.
Well, I guess this isn't a question, but it's interesting. When King Harold was here a few years ago, there was a big dinner sponsored for him, and he mentioned starting school in America, and learning English very well and so on. It's kind of interesting.
Absolutely. I mean, I found absolutely, and I think I found the story Atlantic Crossing super interesting myself. I binge watched the whole series all at once because it was so engaging. I watched it over a course of 2 days, but fascinating to hear about them spending the war here in the United States and the role that played in terms of developing relations between Norway and the United States, and the way in which FDR ultimately played a role in helping Norway and Europe. Other questions? Well, I would like to thank you all for coming today and for inviting me to come and talk to you. And I know I'll extend this to Alan and to any of you. I'm happy to come over at some point when things get back to normal, and or bring one of my colleagues, and we would be happy to talk to you again about other topics. The Hearthstone's a great place, and we look forward to maintaining a good and ongoing relationship with you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Erik. Really. I'm sorry, I was interrupting somebody else.
I just wanted to applaud.
Oh, thank you, Madeline. Thank you.
Yes, it's wonderful. And we'll definitely, this is a tremendous presentation. We'll definitely use you again for other things in the near future on Zoom, and in the distant future, hopefully in person. And hopefully at your place there, because it looks gorgeous.
Fantastic. Well, either way, happy to have you come over, or happy to come over and visit you all too. So, and for the meantime, happy to talk via Zoom too. So, but thank you all for spending your Memorial Day afternoon together, and great to spend time with you and to have this conversation. So, thank you.
Tack ska du ha.
Ja, varsågod. Tack. Tack.
Okay. Adios.
Take care. We'll see you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.